So before we dive deeper into this issue, I want to take a brief step back and talk about self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is a motivational framework. It kind of explains motivation, where your student might be along the motivational spectrum, what causes motivation, what gets rid of motivation. It's a brilliant, an amazing framework. A lot of psychologists use it now. We'll talk a lot about it on this channel. It's definitely the framework that I use for analyzing most situations. There are basically two parts to self-determination theory. One, basically, what are the components of it? How does motivation occur? And basically, there are three things that need to happen. Number one, there has to be autonomy, meaning that there's this feeling of agency, feeling of control, feeling of choice. I'm studying because I want to study, because this is what I want to do, not because I'm being forced to do it. The second thing is competence. Basically, you have to be good at it, okay? Nobody likes to do something that they're bad at, right? It just reminds them how bad they are. But when you're good at something, you just want to do it. And then the third part is relatedness. When you have a good teacher, good students, good parents, supportive environment, that challenges you and supports you, then obviously you're going to be much more motivated to do it. If you have someone saying, oh, you stink, you suck, you're stupid, you're not going to want to do it, right? One point I'll stress in this channel over and over, especially for Asian parents, myself included, autonomy is the most important component within the self-determination theory framework. Without autonomy, it doesn't matter how good you are, competence, and it doesn't matter how great the people around you are. Students must believe, and it must be true in reality, in the real world, that they are in control of what they're doing, and it's their thing. If you don't have that, there will not be motivation. You cannot motivate your child with that. Okay. The second part of self-determination theory is there's a spectrum. In self-determination theory, this is one of the things I really love about this framework, is that it shows the spectrum of going from amotivation all the way to intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is the strongest form of motivation. I'll clarify that a little bit. I'll go into more detail about that later on. But if you look at the spectrum here, we're going from amotivation, and then there are 4 stages of extrinsic motivation, and then you have intrinsic motivation. And for now, I just want you to understand that the goal of motivation, the goal of increasing motivation, our job as parents, what do we need to do? We need to take our students from this amotivation stage and get them to the right side. Our job as parents is to get them from amotivation and move them along to the right of the spectrum. Okay, that's the basic goal. And as that happens, students are becoming more self-determined. That's basically what motivation is. So there are degrees of motivation, right? And there are ways to increase the degrees of motivation. There are superior forms of motivation. There are inferior forms of motivation. And we'll discuss a lot of this in our channel. But for today, we're going to talk about the first stage, which is amotivation. So, your child might be getting A's in every subject except English. And in English, they're getting a B. And they hate English. They don't want to do it. They don't know why they need to do it. So for English, they may be in the stage of amotivation, right? And how do we get them from there to stronger forms of motivation, right? So let's go back to this discussion about meaning and happiness and how that relates to motivation, okay? In the stage of amotivation, it's basically characterized from a psychological perspective in a couple ways. One is a lack of perceived competence, okay? So if the student feels like man, I can't write. My reading is really slow. I don't understand all this literary stuff. I just read this novel and I might as well have just been counting numbers because it didn't mean anything to me. And it was just really difficult to do. I'm just not good at it. You know, when a student talks like that, they're probably in that A motivation phase, because they have a perceived lack of competence, right? The other thing, and this is what we're going to talk about today, the other thing is a lack of value. When the student says, I don't care about this, what does this have to do with me? I just don't want to do it. These kinds of comments where honestly, they're not actually sure why they don't like it, why they're not motivated for it. They're not even sure, right? And we're all kind of at a mystery. This A motivation phase is a bit of a mystery in the field of psychology. There's not a lot of research, especially any kind of definitive research that says here's where A motivation comes from, here's how you solve it. There's not much research out there. From my experience, working with hundreds of students over the past 20 years, dealing with all different types. Granted, most of the students that we deal with at Ivy Zen are generally motivated students. They're not C students, okay? They're B plus, A minus students, but they do have, we call it pockets of A motivation, right? And one thing that I found that has worked time and time again, it's not easy, and it's not an overnight fix. It's a long-term thing. It takes a year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years. You need to start as early as you can. If you come 11th grade, can't help you. But if you come 6th or 7th grade and you understand that there are these pockets of A motivation in your student's life, in their studies, then here are some of the things that we do. They all focus on developing meaning in their lives, more meaning. And so let's go back and talk about meaning and happiness.